Hey there, creative coders! This is Benjamin D. Whiting, and welcome back to the SuperCollider segment of Null-state's interactive digital art tutorial series. Last week we discussed the use of local variables to facilitate the creation of more complex code in our sound-generating functions, as well as the difference between the audio and control sampling rates. This week we will touch upon the creation and use of arguments in our functions that will allow for their external manipulation, as well as more modular code in general. Let's get started. As usual, we'll begin by booting the server. Until now, all of the code we've been generating has made use of hard-coded values. While initially useful to allow us to get our bearings in the language, there are fewer coding styles more discouraged as hard-coding values renders code that could be used and reused in a multitude of different ways into single-use applications. To illustrate, let's instance the following bit of code. Just gonna beautify my code a bit. Before we continue with our main topic of today, I thought I'd take a moment and describe just what you're hearing, as well as explain why I'm placing this code between these two brackets. First, take notice of the initial SignOsc UGen. We're instancing it at the audio rate and at 880 Hz, one octave above 440. Next, take a look at what we've assigned to the mul argument. Remember the LF pulse UGen we explored last episode? We're using it again today, but now as a low-frequency oscillator to control the amplitude of the 880 Hz sine tone. Recall that, unlike the behavior seen in UGens like SignOsc and LF try, where values in between and including -1 and 1 are output, LF pulse alternates between values of 0 and 1, with nothing in between. This LF pulse UGen is set to a frequency of 1 cycle every 2 seconds, and since the width is set to 10%, the signal remains on for 0.2 seconds. The amplitude is then further multiplied by 0.2 so that our ears aren't punished by a 0 dBFS signal. Now, you might be inquiring at this point, but Benjamin, that's all well and good, but how do you account for the second SignOsc in this function, and what's the deal with these semi-rectangular braces that we've not seen until now? I'm glad you've hypothetically asked. Remember how I mentioned the LF pulse UGen is cycling once every 2 seconds? Notice how we're hearing a sine tone pulse every second instead? To explain this, take a look at the second argument here in the LF pulse UGen. This argument is phase offset, which determines where in the waveform's period the unit generator begins. We've set the offset to 0.5, which means that we begin halfway through the period, so the LF pulse begins in its off state and doesn't switch on until 1 second later. Also notice that the first pulse and every other pulse thereafter is heard emanating from the left channel, while the second and every other pulse after that is coming out of the right channel. Last episode I appended a SignOsc to the end of the function setting up our audible LF pulse UGen, at which point the SignOsc overrided the LF pulse, since a sound generating function only outputs what is in its final instruction to the default audio hardware. This time, however, we're hearing both of these SignOscs because we've enclosed them within these two brackets. These brackets are used to set up an array encapsulating a collection of data. In this case, we're wrapping 2 audio signals within the array. The first signal is output through the left channel of our stereo playback system, while the second is piped to the right. Incidentally, our beloved Hello World example is actually shorthand for the following. If you don't completely understand this now, don't worry, our episode on multi-channel expansion is still forthcoming. Suffice to say for the moment that, in an array containing multiple audio signals, the first will be sent to the left channel, while the second will be sent to the right. Back to the matter at hand. Let's say I wanted to modulate the frequency of the synosks to 660 Hz as the pulse is still sounding. Could we simply replace the 880 in the frequency field of both synosks to 660 and reevaluate? Let's find out. Uh-oh, now we're hearing a mixture of 880 and 660 Hz sine tones. Let's try to release them now. As you might have expected, this only released a 660 Hz sine tone, as when we instanced the tilde pulse function with that new frequency value, it had overwritten what was set to tilde pulse before. This means that the only practical way to clear both at this point is by invoking command period, or control period on Windows or Linux. Of course, we could have released the 880 Hz sine tone while simultaneously invoking the new 660 Hz variant by executing several instructions at once, but that is hardly practical, and still incredibly limiting with regard to its modularity. So what can we do? This is where arguments shine. Arguments in SuperCollider are similar to local variables in that they have identical naming restrictions and can be inherited by subsidiary functions, but differ in a few significant ways. These include the following. Arguments must be declared before local variables, if any. Arguments must all be declared in one instruction. Arguments can have values passed into a function externally, and arguments cannot be set to UGens or be directly set by UGens. Let's now rewrite tilde pulse to make use of arguments. Now, unlike with the declaration of local variables, we have a choice of tagging conventions in SuperCollider. The original method, hailing from as far back as SuperCollider 2 on Mac OS 9, is the use of the arg tag, terminating in a semicolon. We can go ahead and set the default values to our hard-coded ones. Don't forget that all arguments must be in one instruction. You can't have multiple arg tags like you can with var tags. By the way, setting defaults to arguments is not strictly required, but is highly recommended except in a few fringe instances. Now let's substitute our shiny new arguments for those moldy old numbers and take a listen. Works rather well. In case you were wondering, offset is a parameter that cannot be modulated post-instantiation, as it only deals with the initial offset of a waveform. The more contemporary variant of argument declaration is the bookending of arguments with single vertical lines like so, without a semicolon. I'm particularly fond of this approach, as it works wonders to facilitate the immediate distinguishing of arguments from local variables. This can be a real boon as one's eyes begin to tire during long programming sessions. Of course, one may pick one's poison. As hinted at before, the use of arguments opens up the possibility to modulate their values as a function is running. This is achieved by the use of the .set instance method of function. The first argument of set is the argument in the function that one wishes to modulate, and the second is the new target value. The argument must be in the form of a symbol, meaning that it either must be preceded by a backslash or enclosed in single quotes. For the purposes of saving a keystroke, I choose the former. Neat, right? Not a beat was lost post-modulation. We can modulate several arguments at once, like so. Of course, right now we're linking these arguments to both synosks simultaneously, but what if we wanted to modulate each UGen independently? The answer? More arguments. Of course, you don't need to be as OCD as me in this regard, but I do enjoy beautifying my code as you see here. Feel free to be as neat or as sloppy as you'd like. Let's have some more fun, shall we? I encourage you to continue to experiment with setting these arguments to all sorts of different values before releasing. Finally, before we wrap up for the day, I wanted to share with you a fairly underappreciated guide lurking within the bowels of SuperCollider's documentation, the Tour of UGens. It's a useful resource exposing a rather satisfying cross-section of SuperCollider's audio unit generators, complete with fantastic interactive examples. It's great when one's starting out and wants to scratch the surface of the synthesis potential the language has to offer, and frankly equally as good when one is set to start a new piece and wants a bit of a sound design refresher course. Now that you have a decent grasp of the fundamentals of the SuperCollider programming language, you are well equipped to begin exploring this treasure trove, tweaking and experimenting with this code to uncover new timbres to add to your sonic palette. Okay, this about wraps it up for our episode on arguments. Due to time constraints stemming from the recent premiere of a new electroacoustic chamber piece of mine, I've decided to split the section on iteration off into its own episode that will be released next week. In the meantime, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel to show your support for more interactive digital music and art content from us at Null-state. Also, make sure to check out our Facebook page and webpage to stay up to date on all of our upcoming events, workshops, and concerts. See you next time!